So the most common file format we get music delivered on these days is as a digital stereo file. And we like to do at least half the processing here analog, because it sort of sounds better and it gives you more tactile interface to use. So I thought I'd just go through and explain the chain that we use here at Eden Sound Mastering. So I play the files out of Pro Tools, and then from Pro Tools they go into the 002, and then they go via light pipe into the Apogee filters, where they get converted to analog. So these are really good high-end digital to analog converters. So this thing is a TC electronic box called the Power Core, and it's a breakout DSP box for some plugins for Pro Tools. Okay, so once it becomes analog, the signal's fed into the Audient Sumo. This thing is a high-end summing amplifier. So basically what it does, it takes a whole bunch of stereo signals and mixes them together at unity gain. So it's like a mixing console but without faders. And the reason why we have this is because sometimes we get stems, which means we get various stereo components of the mix, and we can sum them in the analog world rather than summing them in the Pro Tools mix bus. This way you get a much better sound. It's got 128 dBs of headroom, so you can go crazy with this thing and get really good sound. Where in Pro Tools sometimes it will soft clip the peaks and you don't even notice it, which is not a good thing. Also got a built-in limiter and compressor, which is off the Audient console, the DDA console. This is a pretty handy tool as well. Okay, so from the Sumo, the analog signal gets fed into the Focusrite Blue system. And so what we've got here is a controller which allows you to switch various things in and out, various inserts. You can compare different signals and so on. And so associated with this is the Focusrite Blue 330 compressor and the Focusrite Blue 315 equalizer, which are both designed specifically for mastering. And the equalizer, for instance, has got very, very low value detents on the gains, so that you can turn things up by only 1/3 of a dB, which is pretty accurate. So what you can also do in here is you can easily compare what you're working on, in other words the mastered track, to the unmastered track, and then you can compensate for level, so that if obviously the mastered track's normally louder, so you can pull that down in level so that you can compare the mastered to the unmastered at the same level, which is important because you just want to be able to compare the difference that you're making on the sound rather than the level. And then you can also compare it with other digital signal sources like CDs, so that you can listen to how your track will sound in the real world compared to another CD. And then you've got some monitoring options on here as well, so that you can mute the left side, for instance, you can mute the right side, you can listen to a mono-summed signal, so you can also listen to the difference, which is the mono and then left and right out of phase, which is very handy for hearing distortion and very handy for hearing whether you've got the center of the image in the right spot. And then you've got another button which is swap, so that swaps left and right. That's useful again for hearing. If you've got, say, the vocal in the center, you just listen to the stereo image, you get your head in the right place where this vocal sounds in the center, then you swap left and right over, and if the vocal moves, then you know you haven't got it in the center. As inserts on the Focusrite system, we have the Focusrite equalizer, which is just a good subtle EQ. It's not the sort of thing you use to remove very sort of accurate frequencies, to get rid of ringing and so on. It's just a sort of general brightness, general bit of bottom end, remove some mids, that kind of thing. So, but it's great. It sounds fantastic. And the Focusrite compressor, which is a whole bandwidth compressor, and it's a stereo compressor. There's no individual control over left and right other than the gain on the input and the gain on the output, and then it's got a pretty handy limiter as well. And then we go down to here and we've got the TubeTech stereo multi-band compressor. So this is a valve unit. It's got a lot of warmth in it. You really need to be able to split the stereo signal into multi-bands when you're compressing, And this is because if you just use a single bandwidth compressor, the compression tends to get driven by the bottom end, and so the whole track will pump when the compressor sees the kick drum and the bass. So this way you can separate those out, and you can tighten up the bottom end and treat the mid-range and top separately. So it's got 3 bands. It's got a crossover for each band, a variable crossover, so you can change the point at which the mid-range and the top and the mid-range and the bottom cross over. And each band has got a threshold, ratio, attack, release and makeup gain. So it's like 3 whole separate compressors. So this is great for getting that analog warmth into the track. And then the only other thing we have in the analog chain is a stereo width device, which will either broaden or narrow the stereo image, and also you can put in extra mid-range into the stereo width, or you can take mid-range out of the stereo width. At the end of the analog chain, signal gets converted back to digital again in the TC finalizer. So this is RA to D converter, at which point it becomes, you know, CD quality audio. So this thing also has a bunch of processors in it as well. It's got an equalizer, it's got de-esser, it has compression and limiting, and again this is multi-band compression and multi-band limiting. So this is very similar to what the TubeTech does, but this is digital, so it's a lot faster, it's a lot more accurate, and this is the thing which enables us to get the level onto the CD. And I haven't come across anything that will get the level on as cleanly and as loud and still keep the transient response as the finalizer. I've tried a whole load of different things, and also the good thing about this is it allows you to change the shape of the soft clipping. So you have some options as to how the soft clippings happens. If it starts to break up or it starts to distort, you can change that and hopefully address that issue. So I quite often use at least 1 or 2 EQs in Pro Tools as well, and one of my favourites is this TC dynamic EQ. So this is an equalizer that, as well as being a normal equalizer where you have, you know, various bands that you can, you know, either increase or decrease and change the Q of, you can also set any of those bands to be dynamic EQ, which effectively means they're a de-esser or a compressor just based around a specific kind of frequency. So this one here I've used at about 3.5 kilohertz, and what that's doing on the vocal on this track is when the vocal gets a little sort of bright, it'll just hold it back at those frequencies, and you can see it working if I press play here. So a very useful tool. So quite often when I'm mastering a track, I'll use, you know, 2 or 3 EQ plugins, the EQ on the Focusrite EQ, the EQ on the finalizer, and each one will just be chipping away slightly at the track just to remove a little unwanted, you know, wooliness or just a little unwanted ringing or something, and it just, nothing's too drastic, but it just all adds up, and in the end when you compare before and after, quite often there's a big difference, and everything just comes into focus more and just becomes a lot clearer.